The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was taken, reporters scribbling in their notepads, cameras flashing every few seconds, political analysts whispering among themselves. The tension in the air was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just another trial. This was Karoline Leavitt's moment of reckoning. She sat at the defense table, her posture straight, her expression calm, but the stakes were undeniable. She wasn't just fighting for her reputation, she was fighting for something bigger. Her career, her credibility, her future. Everyone in that room knew what this case meant. If she lost, it wouldn't just be a personal defeat. It would be a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the system. At the prosecution table, David Calloway adjusted his tie, his every move dripping with confidence. He was a man who had built his career tearing apart people, like her politicians who had stepped out of line, public figures who thought they were untouchable. He wasn't just here to win a case. He was here to destroy her. The heavy wooden doors at the front of the room swung open, and Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. The room fell silent as she made her way to the bench. She was known for being ruthless, no-nonsense, and completely unpredictable. If anyone was expecting an easy trial, they had already miscalculated. She took her seat, adjusting her glasses as she looked over the room. Then her gaze landed on Karoline. "Miss Leavitt," she said, her voice firm. "You understand the charges against you?" Karoline nodded. Her voice was clear, steady. "Yes, Your Honor," Judge Whitmore exhaled, tapping her gavel lightly on the desk. "Then let's begin." Calloway wasted no time. He stood, buttoning his jacket as he took his place in front of the jury. His movements were slow, deliberate, the performance of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "This case is not about politics. It is not about personal beliefs. It is about one simple truth: accountability." He turned slightly, casting a quick glance toward Karoline before looking back at the jury. "The defendant, Miss Leavitt, believes she is above the law, that the rules do not apply to her, that she can operate in the shadows, bending the system to her will without consequence. Today, that changes." He walked toward the jury, lowering his voice slightly, making sure every word landed. "The defense will try to distract you. They will say this is an attack, a politically motivated trial, an attempt to silence a voice of opposition. But let me be clear, the evidence will speak for itself. And by the end of this trial, you will see that Miss Leavitt did not just break the law. She knew she was breaking the law. And she did it anyway." He turned sharply back toward the judge's bench. "The prosecution is ready to proceed. Your Honor." The tension in the room was suffocating. The weight of his words hung in the air like a cloud. To anyone watching, it would seem like an open and shut case. But then Karoline stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble with papers or clear her throat. She simply stood. And in that moment, the energy in the room shifted. Her attorney, Miriam Graves, glanced at her briefly, but said nothing. She trusted Karoline to handle this moment herself. Karoline turned toward the jury. Her voice was steady, not defensive, not desperate. Just calm, measured, unapologetic. "This trial isn't about justice," she said. "It's about control." The courtroom stilled. Even Calloway, who had been preparing to sit, paused slightly. Karoline continued. "For years, I have spoken out. I have questioned those in power. I have challenged corruption, and I have refused to be silenced. And now, here we are." She took a step forward, her eyes locking onto the jurors. "You are here today not just to judge me, but to judge something much bigger. Are we still a country where people are free to question those in power? Or do we now punish those who dare to speak? A murmur spread through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed. The judge cleared her throat, her expression unreadable. "Miss Leavitt," she said, "I advise you to stick to the legal arguments." Karoline didn't hesitate. She turned back to face Judge Whitmore directly. "Oh, don't worry, Your Honor. I intend to, because the law is on my side. And I'm going to prove it." The prosecution had come here expecting an easy win. Instead, they had just met their greatest challenge yet. The courtroom was silent, but the weight of the moment was crushing. The prosecution had come in confident, sure of their victory. But Karoline Leavitt had just made one thing very clear: she wasn't going down without a fight. Judge Whitmore tapped her gavel once, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. "Miss Leavitt, you will have your chance to present your case, but for now, we proceed with the prosecution." David Calloway smirked as he stood, adjusting his suit as he made his way back to the center of the room. He thrived in high-profile trials like this, cases where the entire world was watching. He had taken down bigger names before. He had no doubt that today would be no different. He turned to the jury, pacing slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we get lost in dramatic speeches, let's get back to reality. Let's talk about the facts." He picked up a thick stack of papers from the prosecution's table, flipping through them. "This isn't about free speech. This isn't about political persecution. This is about someone who broke the law, knowingly and deliberately, thinking there would be no consequences." He held up a document. "This contract, signed by Miss Leavitt herself, outlines the very policies she violated. These were not hidden rules. They were not unfairly applied. They were clear, and she ignored them anyway." He walked toward the judge, placing the document on her bench. "Your Honor, I would like to submit this as evidence proof that the defendant knew exactly what she was doing." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Noted. Proceed." Calloway turned back to the jury, his voice steady, controlled. "She wants you to believe this is about something bigger than her actions. She wants you to think she's some kind of symbol. But I'm asking you to see the truth. This is about responsibility, about actions having consequences. And today, Miss Leavitt must face hers." He gave one final glance toward Karoline before returning to his seat. For the first time since the trial began, all eyes were on her. Now it was her turn. Miriam Graves, Karoline's attorney, stood slowly. Unlike Calloway, she didn't pace or put on a performance. She simply walked to the jury box, hands clasped in front of her. "What the prosecution won't tell you," she began, "is why this case exists in the first place." She paused, letting her words settle. "They say this is about accountability. But let's ask a simple question. Why Karoline? Why now? Why this case, out of thousands just like it, was chosen for a public trial?" The jury leaned in slightly. This was the question that had been lurking beneath the surface the entire time. They claim this is about the law. But what if I told you the law has been used as a weapon? That certain people, certain voices are targeted, while others walk away untouched? She picked up a stack of papers from the defense table, the very contract the prosecution submitted as evidence. "We have records showing others in similar situations who received no punishment at all, no trial, no public humiliation. So I ask you again, why Karoline?" The gallery murmured. Even Judge Whitmore seemed to shift slightly in her seat. Calloway scoffed. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is trying to turn this into a political conspiracy theory." Miriam didn't even blink. "Your Honor, the prosecution said this case was about fairness. I am proving that it is anything but." Judge Whitmore considered this for a long moment before nodding. "I'll allow it." "Continue." Calloway's jaw tensed slightly. This wasn't going as easily as he expected. Miriam stepped closer to the jury. Miss Leavitt will take the stand. She will answer every question. She has nothing to hide. But before you judge her, before you accept the prosecution's version of events, I ask that you open your eyes to a much bigger truth. Is this about justice? Or is this about power? She turned, looking directly at Calloway. And more importantly, who really stands to benefit from tearing her down? The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even Karoline, who had prepared for every possible argument, felt the energy shift in the room. The prosecution had been certain they were in control. But now, for the first time, they weren't so sure. The weight of the moment pressed down on the entire courtroom. Every person in the gallery, reporters, analysts, political insiders, sat on the edge of their seats. This was no longer just a trial. This was a battle over power, control, and the very idea of justice. Karoline Leavitt took a slow breath as she stood, walking to the witness stand. The murmurs in the crowd faded into silence as she raised her right hand, swearing to tell the truth. She knew that this was her moment. Whatever happened next would define her future. David Calloway, the prosecution's bulldog, stood with the same smug confidence he had carried throughout the trial. But this time, there was a flicker of something else in his expression. Doubt. He adjusted his tie, picked up his notes, and stepped forward. Miss Leavitt, he began, his voice smooth but firm. Do you deny signing the contract that clearly stated the policies you violated? Karoline met his gaze without hesitation. No, I don't deny it. Calloway raised an eyebrow. So you admit you broke the rules? Karoline exhaled slowly. I admit I made a choice, and I stand by it. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. Calloway smirked, glancing at the jury as if he had already won. A choice? He repeated, feigning amusement. You're telling this court that knowingly violating a contract is simply a choice? Karoline didn't blink. Yes. And you know what else is a choice, Mr. Calloway? Selective prosecution. Going after people who challenge power while letting others off the hook. That's a choice, too, the courtroom stilled. Even Judge Whitmore leaned in slightly, as if she hadn't expected that response. Calloway's smirk faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. Miss Leavitt, this trial isn't about politics. Karoline tilted her head slightly. Isn't it? Calloway pressed on. This is about accountability. Karoline nodded. Then let's talk about accountability. Let's talk about why people in positions far more powerful than mine have broken far worse rules and never even seen the inside of a courtroom. Let's talk about how this case was cherry-picked, not because of justice, but because of optics. She turned to the jury now, her voice clear, unwavering. This trial is meant to send a message. But what's the real message? That the law applies to everyone equally? Or that it only applies to those who refuse to fall in line? The tension in the room was suffocating. Calloway opened his mouth, but for the first time, he didn't seem to have the perfect rebuttal. Judge Whitmore tapped her gavel lightly. Miss Leavitt, please stick to the legal argument. Karoline nodded, keeping her composure. Of course, Your Honor. And the legal argument is this. You can't apply one set of rules to some people and a different set to others. That is not justice. That is manipulation. She turned back to Calloway, locking eyes with him. If you truly believed in accountability, you wouldn't be standing here trying to make an example out of me. You'd be asking why the system is designed to protect some and destroy others. A long silence followed. Then, Judge Whitmore cleared her throat. I believe we've heard enough. The jury will deliberate. The courtroom erupted as reporters rushed out to file their breaking news reports. The trial that had been expected to be a routine conviction had become something else entirely, a fight over the very nature of fairness and power. Karoline returned to her seat, her hands folded in front of her. She had done all she could. Now it was up to the jury. Minutes passed, then hours. The courtroom remained full, tension hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, unfolding the slip of paper that contained the verdict. Judge Whitmore nodded. "Has the jury reached a decision?" The foreman cleared his throat. "We have, Your Honor." A pause. A breath. The entire world watching. "On the charge of willful misconduct, we find the defendant not guilty." The room exploded. Gasps. Shouts. The prosecution's table froze. Calloway's face drained of color. Karoline closed her eyes for a brief second, then smiled. She had won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told to stay silent. Outside the courthouse, as she stepped into the flashing lights of the cameras, a journalist called out, "Miss Leavitt, what's next for you after this shocking victory?" She paused, looking at the sea of microphones in front of her. Then, with the same calm, unwavering voice she had used in the courtroom, she simply said, "I'm just getting started." What do you think? Was this trial about justice or something bigger? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. The next fight is just around the corner.